In this episode of the Rockets Chop Shop podcast, I am joined by my man, James Pearson. We chop it up about Rockets coaching decisions. They got some decisions to make about their coaches. Who should we pick? Ime, Nick, Kenny? Some good candidates for the Rockets. Who should they go with? We also talk about Jaylen Brown. Should he be a Rocket? Is he a good fit for the team? Let's get into it. Tap in, enjoy.
Plug and play.
Well, it's very tough in this league, right? To just say we're going to win all the time, right? No matter what happens to us, we're going to win all the time, and our culture is going to make sure that happens, right? That's very difficult. But I believe that. You asked me how long does it take? Listen, there's steps I believe that you got to take on a daily basis if you want your team to be able to guard. And when you're young, it's going to take a rookie at least a full year to absolutely even figure out how to play defense in this league. Like, give them a year, and then the next year maybe they can start figuring it out on a consistent basis, right? Even as talented and as long and as athletic and as whatever they can be to have all the tools to be great defensively, these other guys are trying to stop are awesome. And the things that coaches are doing are hard to stop and all those kind of things. So that's where it starts for me. So if you got a young team, it's going to take you a couple years to get that defensive mentality ingrained. I don't know. You can go from there.
All right, I got my man here, James Pearson, Chop Shop contributor. He just wrote 2 fire articles that we've been meaning to get to, and both talk about some very, very kind of things that are very pertinent and important to the Rockets right now, which is improving our players and improving the coaching. As you all know, those are 2 areas we lack a lot in. And the first thing I want to touch on, bro, is the article you wrote titled, "Should the Rockets Target Nick Nurse This Summer?" And over the past few days, a lot of people have been talking about the different coaching candidates we've had. And I've heard a lot of different things. And it seems like people are really low on Nick Nurse. When me and Space did a podcast maybe a month or so ago, and I think you were on that when we talked about, we've talked about some of the coaching candidates we've liked. I didn't know Nick Nurse was going to be on the market, and I've even said that my top would probably be Kenny Atkinson's or somebody like that. But with some of the, right now it's just rumors, but some of the things coming out about him possibly being out in Toronto, some interest on the side of Houston, maybe some interest on the side of Nick Nurse himself. First of all, just kind of let us know, where do you stand on the Nick Nurse situation?
Yeah, I would definitely be in favor of hiring Nurse, man. One thing that I think I've seen a lot of people argue, like, well, why is Toronto getting rid of him, and why should we want him if Toronto is firing him? Like, I don't think that's logical because, like, look, every NBA team is in a different situation, right? Like, the Raptors won a championship all but a few years ago, and they have plenty of the pieces that they won the championship with, or at least like a few really key pieces, right? So this is a team that, like, yeah, they're on the decline. They may want to start looking at a rebuild and stuff, but they currently have a much higher standard than we do. Like we're lucky to not be the worst team in the league 3 years running. We're horrible, So it's like, if Nick Nurse is available, like, bro, this guy won an NBA championship. This is the head coach of a championship winning team. Like, yeah, we should definitely hire him if that's an option. I don't really see a good argument against it, man.
Yeah, I'm and this as far as like content, this is going to be a podcast. Me and James are aligned in a lot of things we're going to talk about, but yeah, I'm with you. He is my favorite coach in the NBA, and really where he won me over was during the championship run. For some reason, people think it's easy to get to the finals, and for some other reason, people think that winning the finals, I don't care whether it's lucky or not lucky, it doesn't take luck to be holding that trophy at the end of the year. That takes dedication and skill and being really, really good at your job. And if people don't know, Nick Nurse is pretty much won at every level he's been at. He used to coach overseas. He won overseas, won a championship there, coached in the G League, won a G League championship, and coached in the NBA. And obviously we saw what he did with that team. To me, the way I judge a lot of coaches, and there's 2 extremes to judging coaches, because as we've discussed, and I agree, and I know you hold this philosophy that the players really what drives like wins and losses in the NBA for the majority of the part. But there are extremes where coaching does come into play. The 2 extremes to me are a really bad team and a really good team. And what I mean by a really bad team is a coach of a really bad team, what can you do to make them overperform and show things that they wouldn't have done otherwise, like we see with OKC and things like that, or even to a lesser extent in Utah. And for a really good team, if you have a great roster, can you get them to that mountaintop? And to me, those two extremes are really where I can say that coach is good, because it's hard to differentiate, is it just the players if you're like a 40 win team, a 50 win team that goes out in the first round. And so for Nick Nurse, he's shown to me both actually, because the year you get a Kawhi Leonard, that's the year you win a championship. They weren't expected to win the championship. They were a good team. They might have been possibly favored in some matches, but not all of them. The Giannis matchup, the obviously what they did with Giannis was very impressive, but to actually get that team over the top, to me, shows he's good. And then also on the back end, to me, the year with Scotty, before Scotty Barnes came, that a team that was supposed to be tanking, for them to be able to do what they did and make the Scotty Barnes rookie year to make the playoffs with no expectations there for them to do that, even though they got bounced in the first round. To me, that was an overperformance by that team for that.
Yeah. Yeah, man. You could make the case that the first year post Kawhi, they overperformed too, I think.
They
Or at
did.
least, yeah, they certainly, like met expectations. Like he hasn't really had like a horrible season or anything. Going back a bit to what you're saying about great coaches, I completely agree. Like at the end of the day, to win a championship, you have to win at the margins. And that's just one of the margins, right? It's like, well, we have a great coach and you only have a good coach. And so that's one, it can be a significant advantage when it comes down to like a playoff series, right? And I completely agree with you insofar as you can't discredit any NBA championship because, yeah, they got extremely lucky with injuries in the finals, right? Like everybody on the Warriors got hurt, no doubt about it. They still beat the Bucks, excuse me, and they beat the Sixers with Jimmy Butler. Like, I mean, these were really good teams, Personally, I remember I had them beating the Sixers, but I was really not confident, and I had the Bucks beating them. So, like, and I wasn't, like alone. Like, this was not like a powerhouse super team. They were an excellent team, but it's a credit to his coaching acumen that they won a championship. You can't really argue out of that.
Yeah, so I totally agree with that. And even just looking at, like, if you look at what we need, I think really what it comes down to, any coach right now is probably an upgrade. It could be just swapping out what Steven Silas has done or not been able to do. Like I've always, said this. I'm sure Steven Silas is a brilliant man when it comes to basketball. He's probably forgotten more basketball than any of us could ever know in our lifetimes. The problem with having such a young team with so many young players, if you're going to draft all these young players, is that, and you pointed this out in the articles, that stern hand that you kind of need to build the foundational principles that you need to really start becoming a winning team. And one of the things that I really look at for coaches, and this is where I was always skeptical about Silas, is that the first step to being a winning team is establishing a defensive identity. I don't think that you can ever go around that. Like you don't get a young team and try to be an offensive powerhouse and win your way to that level. And if you look at, I don't even care what, everybody, we always use Golden State as a standard for rebuilds. One thing that changed their fortunes was not only Steve Kerr coming in and changing how the players were utilized, was also them becoming a top 10 defense. That really, really helped and increasing in that. And for me, like, to build this house of a championship team, the foundation has to be laid on defense. And I feel like if you look at what the Rockets have been doing, they've been one of the worst defenses for the past 3 years. Not really, no real improvement to really point out in that end of the court. I posted a tweet on Twitter showing that even one of the worst parts of defense that we have right now is our transition defense. Dead last in transition defense. We're dead last in transition offense this season. Last year we were 25th in transition defense, so we gotten worse from last year. And last year we were dead last in transition offense. Now I'm going to judge Silas by his words. One of the things he said this team was supposed to do was get up and down. They're going to run. We're going to hustle on defense. And to me, offense and defense are both measures that look at hustle and being able to push pace and get out and running. And they failed in doing that for the past few seasons. So even judging him by his own standards, he hasn't really met up to that. So I just really think that, there's been a lot of different coaches, whether it's Idoka or Nurse. I've even heard, obviously Kenny Atkinson, Frank Vogel, all these names have come up, but to me, anybody that can really bring that. And the reason that I like Nick Nurse, and I want to get your take on this, is really when people don't give him credit for is his creativity on defense. Whatever Silas was touted to be as an offensive genius, I think Nick Nurse is that on defense. And I think some of the schemes and the way he uses his players that people have used it against him to some ways is really what makes him a really, really elite coach. And to me, their defense is what helped them win that championship that they won with Kawhi.
Oh, no doubt, man. I think the knock, I mean, if you like, you can't deny that Nurse is obviously a defensive innovator. He pretty much invented like building the wall, which is pretty much just like packing the paint outside of the paint in a weird way. It's, I guess it's not literally a completely original idea, but it was an innovative means of stopping Giannis, right? Like you had to give him that. And then he broke out the box and won. Like the ingenuity to take an old technique and use it in a new context is also something he definitely deserves credit for. Yeah, he's a defensive mastermind, and we're like the worst defensive team in the league. I want to go back a little bit to something he said, right? Silas, he preached emphasizing transition this season. That was supposed to be a thing, right? But then our team like has this odd tendency to crash the offensive glass like way
Yeah.
too aggressively. And that, I mean, that's counterintuitive to transition. I understand that impacts transition defense more than transition offense, but like they're one and the same because you create opportunities. Like if you're going to play transition, you have to play transition. You know what I mean? If you want to be a transition heavy team, you can't just look to run on offense, but then not get back on defense. You have to be playing the like that fast break style both ways. So that just tells me that Silas, like, yeah, I agree with you that he's probably a really high level basketball mind, but this ain't working, you know? So
Yeah.
there's a lot of reasons for that. Yeah.
That's an understatement. This ain't working is an understatement for our team. I think when you look at some of the players that we have, and just to talk about like the rosters that Toronto has fielded, you look at their roster when he had, to me, what I like about coaches, I look at another good mark of a coach is being able to use what you have that's available to you and make the best out of that. And like when he's had good players, they've been a good team. And the only season that the Raptors were really horrible was the season where they were playing in Tampa Bay, right? And you're basically every game is a road game for them that whole season, compounded by everything going on with the pandemic and everything coming
Yep.
out of the stoppage season and the bubble. So every other year, like Cleaning the Glass has a metric where they look at, expected wins compared to what the teams actually do. And he's outperformed. Basically, he's overperformed his projected wins for his team every season except that season. And currently, this season, he's down by 3 games as far as what the team that he has is supposed to do. So, you know, that does, to me, it's like you can't judge a coach, like you pointed out earlier, by what they're leaving. Like we've seen Mike D'Antoni get fired. He was a good coach. Hell, Phil Jackson left the Bulls. Like, we can't say,
Yeah.
well, Phil, you suck because the Bulls are letting him go. And if the Lakers wanted to hire him, they're going to say, well, I don't know. He is leaving the Bulls. Like, you got to look at the context of what's going on. I mean, it's really like I just love what he does, and I think that looking at what he did with like some of the players he had when he had Marcus Gasol. And if you look at a player that has defensive deficiencies like a Sengun, you know what they did a lot back then? They played a lot of zone. They played a lot of zone. The Raptors 3-2 zone was elite. And the thing with them is that they had a lot of high IQ players that were able to switch out from zone to playing man in the middle of a play. And he does demand that. And I think the focus for us, whether we have, whether it's Jaylen, and his weaknesses, Sengun and his weaknesses, is having a coach that looks at them and say, what can I do with you? People knock him for the roster with the 6'11" thing. The concept behind that, I get it. It was a failed experiment to an extent, which is if you're going to play a zone, then why not have 6'11", 6'10" wings that have a wingspan that you can't pass within that zone, and they take up so much of the court. The Bucks tried it, and so to me, he comes down to Houston. He's going to have a Jabari Smith Jr. that you can do so many things with. You're going to have a Tari Eason that you can do so many things with. You're going to have different players. You might even draft a Wemby. It's to me, it's a no brainer. And if we were ranking this, I'd have him as my first choice. Another good candidate though is Ime Udoka. And Ime is another coach that obviously fits the bill for somebody that's going to bring some accountability and structure for the team. And to me, a lot of the things that he does well are really on the defensive side of the ball. But the only knock I would have on Ime is the sample size. I just haven't seen enough. It's like if you're going to knock Nick Nurse for what he's done, basically he's done what Ime has done, but he actually won the championship. Then went on to prove more years that he's actually a good coach. We don't know what Ime is. I think in theory people have him as he's an elite coach, but the Celtics are still poised to be one of the favorites right now without him. So, what is
Yeah.
your view on that dynamic with Ime?
No, man, but that's a good point. It ties back to what we were talking about insofar as like, well, you can't always judge a coach strictly by their results because look at Boston. Like they were a contender with Brad Stevens. Somewhere along the line, he lost the locker room. I think that had more to do with like personality than it did basketball. So they got Udoka. Udoka, let's just say, lost the locker room. And now they got this guy, Joe Missoula, or what I can't remember.
Missoula.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Missoula,
Yep.
right. And so they're still contenders. So like obviously there's this roster, there's more to it than coaching. They were really nice personnel and lineup construction and things that are just conducive to winning. Like they just have an excellent team. So I agree with you that Udoka, the sample size is a little too limited, but I did like what I saw. I thought the ball started moving a little more crisply and stuff than it did with Stevens. The offense got a little more sort of creative. There was a little more off-ball screening, and the defense improved. Maybe that had something to do with like Time Lord coming into his zone around the same time, But nonetheless, I like what I've seen from Udoka. I think he's another great candidate, but I would agree with you that Nurse is a stronger candidate, just given that he's got a more proven track record. He doesn't have the baggage, which I don't like really care about that. But if you're scoring it like point for point,
Right.
it is a thing. You know what I mean? There is, with that said, a significant score on the Udoka side as well, which we are going to talk about, I believe.
Yes, and that we can transition right into that with the Jaylen Brown discussion. This has been going on for like a week and a half now. Once again, another one that my view on all of this is like, guys, we're the Rockets. Like any of these
Yeah.
names that we're saying, like let's just be grateful. I've seen people say they don't want him near the team. One of the weirdest takes I've seen on the Jaylen Brown thing is that he's redundant to Jalen Green. I take pride in like watching basketball and evaluating basketball, and I really don't see that. I don't see that a million miles away. The redundancy between their two, they play really different styles, and Jaylen Brown's a small forward. I don't know if anybody knows that, but if you look at cleaning the glass, a majority of his where he plays on the court is at small forward for the Boston Celtics, more than he plays at two guard. So, and I think small forward is a position of need that we have right now on the team. So I don't see that redundancy between him and Jaylen as being like two players that are going to overlap each other. It's just he can play defense. To me, that qualifies him to be on any roster. That's my litmus test for a guy that can be on a team. Can he play defense? Yes. Okay, he can fit. So what do you see?
I think there's a bit of a mass brain fry going on with Rockets fan base. That's a little harsher than I meant it to be, but like, okay, because here's an argument I've been seeing, right? Well, if we get Jaylen Brown, then aren't we saying that Green is not going to be the alpha scorer that we envisioned when we drafted him? It's like, no, you can have two alpha scorers on the same team. In fact, that's a good thing. It's just that, but
Right.
then I think what happens is people say, well, then how come Kevin Porter Jr. and Jalen Green can't coexist? It's like, well, one of those alpha scorers can't be running point. Like you can have two score first guys if one of them is running point, I don't think. Uh
Thanks.
yeah, the Celtics, they make Tatum and Brown work. They're effectively both score first. Tatum has developed as a playmaker to facilitate the duo, but he's still not like an elite, like LeBron, Luca level playmaker. He's just like he's solid. He finds his guys when they're open, kind of thing. And so I don't think it's that we need to go get like the next Cade Cunningham / Luca / whatever archetype to fit with Green. It's not we need one of the best passers in the league. We need good players, and then we just need a floor general that like sets up offense. It doesn't have to be Tyrese Halliburton.
Facts. And the article, if I didn't say earlier, is called Should the Rockets trade for Jaylen Brown?" And obviously with that trade, there's a price. There's always going to be a price point. My thing is I don't think that they should trade, everything for him. But if there's a price, it's not going to be cheap. But I'm willing to go pretty deep into the pockets to get him, because I feel like a player of his caliber is not something that happens every. That's not something that comes across. To me, he's projected, in my opinion, as far as realistic available players, probably in the next 3 years, probably the best one that you might be on the market, given age and experience, and a guy that's been a winner since he got into the NBA. This is a dude that I was looking at their stats, and I know you pointed out in the article that if you look at his raw numbers, they're not bad, but they're not like, oh my god. But they're pretty good. They're all NBA level. But as far as a guy that you're going to trade possibly a lot of your future assets for, you may want more. But if you look at what he was doing in like the finals or in the playoffs, that is to me what separates him from a lot of the field, because it's not often that you have a guy that performs at the highest levels. And to me, that's really, we've seen, honestly, James Harden he kind of takes, pardon the pun, a step back in some of these big games. But where a guy like Jaylen Brown, and it might be something that's intangible, but being able to step up in the moment as a scorer and a defender on a team, facing probably a historic team, is, to me, it's a big deal, because I
Let
know if
me
we get there that he can add something to us getting the dub.
Oh hell yeah, man! So let me pose this, right. I'm just kind of working these thoughts out, but in the playoffs, realistically, shot creation is a more valuable skill than playmaking, because playmakers look to solve a defense, right? But some defenses are unsolvable. But if you're an elite shot creator, you can just get offense anyway, right? So like when the chips are down and when you're playing against strong to elite defenses, it's probably more important to be able to create your own shot than it is to be able to set other guys up, because there are defenses that are just not going to give you the seams that you need to set guys up, right?
Yep.
So Brown to me is a very playoff proof type of player. And like going back on my article, I put off a tweet that said Brown's not statistically a top 30 player by any measure. And it got a lot of blowback. I got a lot of people saying like, oh, he's a top 30 player. How can you say he's not a top 30 player? I'm like, he is a top 30 player, right? But I'm talking about trade value wise.
Right.
He's not top 30 in like VORP, win shares, box plus
Right.
minus, whatever. Whatever you put in that is up to you. I don't really even put a whole lot in it. But the guys that you would trade like Jaylen and the third pick and Sengun and 3 Brooklyn picks for, they got to be top 10 in those categories. So like
Right.
I wouldn't trade like an MVP candidate level package for him, but I would trade a lot for him. And what I think is really meaningful is that consistently in all indexes shot creation metrics, he's like really high percentile. Like he really is one of the best bucket getters in the league, man.
Yep, and it doesn't drop off in the playoffs, and that's back to the point I was saying. I mean, on synergy, like I'm looking at his play types. Uh, Very good in transition, very good as a pick and roll ball handler, very good in spot up. He's good in isolation. I mean, he's a decent defender. He's not the best defender, but he's good as a defensive player off screens and spot ups, as a pick and roll ball handler. He's good guarding the handoffs. A little below average in isolation, but you're going to look at if you look at his matchups, he's guarding the other team's best player, wing scorer, a lot of the nights. And if you look at it on a team building, when we go back to like what does a good team look like, one of the things I have with Jalen, and I might have to do a future video on this with Jalen Green, is that as much as the scoring is like impactful, it doesn't really add anything to winning, in my opinion, in a vacuum. Because scoring is probably one of the least, when you look at a team like championship wise, just having a player, if your best player, all they do is score, is probably the least impactful thing that a good player could do. Meaning a Bradley Beal that could average a 32 points per game and just be on one of the worst teams in the league. The most impactful things are going to be playmaking and defense. And to your point, you've always talked about having a rim protector. That at baseline, if you have a back end, to me, a center and a point guard, it's probably the two most impactful positions to winning games. Jaylen is not a center, and Jaylen is not a point guard. So we still have those needs. So when you go into the middle of that with shooting guards, small forwards, and power forwards, it comes really down to defense, and everything else they do is just icing on the cake. In order for Jalen Green to be part of a winning team, he has to be a good defender. Not great, but good. And if he's then when you have a team that has a good defender at him, you get a small forward that could score pretty much at will and is a good defender. We know Jabari is slated to be a good defender. To me, that's the core of a championship. Then when you get Jaylen scoring, maybe he drops 40 in the playoffs or goes off because you can't stop him. That's what elevates what we're trying to do. And that's what gets you to that point. But if you guys are looking at Jaylen like, oh yeah, he's a bucket and this is the guy that we need to like look at it bigger. Like he is going to be a great player and a great addition to a great team. But to build around him, you're going to need guys that are versatile defensively. And Jaylen Brown is the poster child for a player you want to put next to Jalen Green. And
Absolutely,
that's the
man.
way I see it.
Yeah, absolutely. And let me say a few other things on that note too, right? First of all, like I'm not even necessarily interested in Brown if we draft Victor Wembanyama or Scoot Henderson. Now, I'm not saying I'm not, right? But there is a part of me that could say, you know what? We just got like an absolute blue chip guy. Maybe we ought to just like hold on to our assets, go sign some like good solid veterans instead and let it play out a little slower and like, make sure we're doing the right stuff, But if we don't get one of those guys, well, the tank's over, man. And we didn't get like a elite level guy, to be honest. I love Jalen. I think Jalen's basically the same sentiments you echoed. I think he's probably gonna lead the league in scoring one day, but I don't know that he's going to be the best player on a championship team. I would say it's unlikely, right? Just by virtue of the fact that that's usually unlikely. So if we don't get that dude, then it's time to pivot. And to me, I can hardly think of many better pivots than trading for Brown. Because I think a big part of trading for Brown is this: you're baking in an assumption that he'll look a little different without Tatum and that he's capable
Yeah.
of being like the top option, right? And so, I mean, you can't really measure that because we've hardly seen him without Tatum. There's like a 17 game sample or something. He's been great in it, but like, who cares? But if Stone thinks he sees that, then I absolutely think it's a good plan B, failing Wemby or Scoot.
And it definitely is. And, we've done the exercise where we actually went through the roster and added money and did all that stuff. And in a world where you do get a Brown, obviously it has to be a wink and a nod where he's going to resign. Like you
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
make that move like, oh, we're going to trade everything just for 1 year rental. Like the assumption is that backroom dealings that go on very constantly in the NBA, the agent already says, yes, we have an offer on the table. We're going to agree to this offer in advance. You play out the rest of your season here, then we'll get you that contract. With the Harden thing, how does that connect? I mean, you could still trade for Brown, get a James Harden, and add a top pick to the roster and roll like that. But to me, if you get him, it makes my dream scenario for this bill going forward a little more feasible, which is just get some good vets, right? Get a good point guard, get a good center, starting or backup, that's more defensively focused than Sengun as he grows and learns to be a better defender. And maybe he comes off the bench, maybe he starts, whatever. But you bring those two things in. You have a Jaylen Brown and Jalen Green, a Jabari Smith second year. Maybe KPJ is coming off the bench because he's not going to start in front of Jaylen Brown at the three. And to me, that's almost a 40-something win team. If you have a Nick Nurse, you're probably going to win 45 games with that team because you guys really don't know the impact of a good point guard, a good center that can play whether a backup or starting. I keep having to say that, and a good coach. Like that is worth a lot of wins when you have that on your roster.
And dude, this is like why I've maintained some optimism about where the rebuild is going is because a lot of the mistakes, or rather the problems with the team, are extremely low hanging fruit. Like we clearly don't have a rim protector. We do not have a point guard. As you said about the rim protection, whether it's backing up LP or starting, there's no situation where we can put a rim protector on the floor right now. Like
Right.
like if we're getting killed in the paint, getting killed on the pick and roll, what can we do? We could try Garuba, but he's really more of a switch big. So like, that's 48 minutes of hell right there. And then we don't have a point guard. So to me, the problems are pretty easily fixed, and we don't have good veterans. I have a feeling it's easy to turn this around if turn this around means like not be a pile of garbage, but like in terms of like building a championship team, that's not easy to turn around. Obviously, that's a different thing.
Yeah, and that's a ways down the line.
Yeah.
Like once again, let's stop judging like, oh, he didn't win a championship. Like we're not trying to win it. We're just trying to be competent. The steps, one of the missteps to me, if anything, even in the tanking, like with the fact that we wanted to tank, was the Silas hiring and keeping. And I think they should have moved on from much earlier, because I think some of the foundational principles that you want to build in a young team that is going to pivot and try to build up and ramp up to being competitive, he just hasn't instilled yet. And whoever this new coach is, they're going to have to lay the foundation down. And I've said this multiple times. I think regardless of what we do, it's going to be impact. It's whatever we were supposed to win is not going to be as much as we win. I'll be satisfied being a 30 plus win team, depending on the moves we make. Now, if we get Harden and like Jaylen Brown, then you're probably going to be in the playoffs. That's a playoff team, and with some of these young talented guys coming off the bench. But like you said, my thing, I agree with you as far as the optimism. Nothing has been broken to the point that it can be fixed. The execution is going to be a bit tough, and that's where I kind of look at like Stone. You haven't shown me much, but you got it. He has to like bring his A game. He has to be
Oh
Nick
yeah.
Nurse in the Milwaukee series this offseason.
Yeah.
Like, what you got, brother? Like, you got to show us.
We need that
But
box of one, man.
we need that box of one, bro. Go in that office in that contract room and box of one the agents and everything else. Box of one the draft. Pull out the wall when you're trying to. We got to make some
Yeah.
moves, and
No
all
doubt,
of this could be the cherry on the cake with a Wembanyama coming in here. That'll be game changer for everything. Yeah, but appreciate you, bro. Just wanted to wrap this, talk some of the articles you dropped. I'm going to have the links to James's articles in the description of this podcast or video, wherever you're consuming this at. Yeah, bro. Thanks for coming through.
Thanks, man. I appreciate you.